Karen had been walking through the dense woods near her home, the chill of the early autumn air biting at her skin, when she heard the faintest sound. It was barely audible, but unmistakable, soft whimpers that seemed to travel through the rustling leaves and the gusting wind. She paused, straining her ears, trying to place where the sound had come from. The wind howled louder, almost drowning out the desperate cries. But still, there was something familiar in those whimpers, a sound that tugged at her heart. Without thinking, she turned toward the noise and started walking, her pace quickening as the cries grew louder. Karen's footsteps crunched through the dry leaves as she made her way deeper into the woods. The sound became more distinct, the pitiful whimpers growing clearer and more urgent. Her heart raced in her chest, a mix of concern and confusion building inside her. As she rounded a bend in the path, the source of the cries became evident. There, at the edge of the woods, was an old, decrepit well. Its stone walls were cracked, and the surrounding area was overgrown with weeds and vines. Karen's breath caught in her throat. She could see the outline of something dark in the depths of the well. As her eyes adjusted to the dimness, she realized with a jolt of horror that it was a dog, a German shepherd, his brown eyes reflecting the dim light, filled with confusion and pain. He was trapped, struggling against the slick walls of the well, his paws scraping against the smooth stone as he tried in vain to climb his way out. The moment of realization hit her hard, a sinking feeling in her stomach. She took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Duke," she called softly, her voice shaking. She knew the dog immediately. This was Duke, the neighbor's dog, always friendly, always full of energy. How had he ended up here, trapped at the bottom of the well? The wind whipped around her as she crouched near the edge, peering down at the dog. Duke's eyes locked with hers, and he whimpered softly, his body shivering in the cold, damp air. Karen's heart broke. She could see the fear in his eyes, but she also saw something else, a glimmer of hope, of trust. He recognized her. He was waiting for her to help, to save him. "Don't worry, Duke," Karen whispered, trying to steady her voice as she leaned closer to the edge of the well. "I'm here. I'm going to get you out of there." She reached down, her hand trembling as she spoke to him softly, trying to keep him calm. "Hang in there, boy. I'm not leaving you. You're not alone." Duke's whimpers grew fainter, but he seemed to settle a little, reassured by her voice. She could see the flicker of trust in his eyes, even though his body was still shaking with fear and cold. Karen felt a surge of emotion as she watched him. This wasn't just an animal in distress, this was a companion, a creature who had always been loyal and loving, now in a situation where he needed her more than ever. Karen took a deep breath, knowing she had to act quickly. She stood up and looked around, searching for something, anything, that might help her pull Duke to safety. The well was deep, the stone walls slick with moisture from the recent rains. There was no way to simply reach down and pull him out. She felt a sense of helplessness creeping in, but she shook it off. She wouldn't give up. Not on Duke. Not now. She rushed back to her house, her mind racing. As she entered the small, cluttered kitchen, she grabbed the thick rope she kept in the garage for tying down things in her truck. She could use it to try to reach Duke, but it wasn't long enough. She cursed under her breath, frustrated by the limitations. The well was too deep. The walls were smooth and wet, offering no foothold for the dog to climb up. She couldn't reach him with her hands. The realization hit her hard, panic starting to rise in her chest. Karen grabbed her phone, dialing the number for the local rescue service, her hands shaking. She explained the situation as quickly as she could, her voice frantic. "Please, I need help. A dog is trapped in the well, and I can't get him out. It's too deep. Please, someone has to help." The dispatcher on the other end of the line reassured her, promising that help would be on the way. But as Karen looked out the window, she saw the rain starting to fall harder, and the sound of the wind howling through the trees grew louder. The thought of Duke alone, cold and in pain, gnawed at her. Time was slipping away. Every minute that passed, she feared he would lose his strength, and they might be too late. She rushed back to the well, kneeling down to check on Duke again. He had stopped whimpering, but his body was still trembling. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes now, his once bright gaze dulled by the ordeal. She spoke to him again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here, Duke. Just hold on a little longer. Help is on the way." But Karen knew deep down that she was running out of time. Her stomach twisted as she realized the urgency of the situation. The cold rain was soaking her through, but it didn't matter. What mattered was getting Duke out. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him. She stood up, pacing back and forth, her thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. She needed help, and she needed it now. As she stood there, staring down at Duke, she couldn't help but feel helpless. She had always prided herself on being able to solve problems, to find a way out of any situation. But this was different. She wasn't just facing an obstacle. She was facing the very real possibility that she might not be able to save the dog in time. Her heart ached as she listened to the faint whimpering coming from below. She knelt by the edge again, her fingers brushing against the cold stone, hoping Duke could sense her presence. She needed him to hold on, to stay strong just a little bit longer. She whispered words of comfort, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'm not leaving you, Duke," she said, her voice thick with desperation. "You're going to make it through this. I promise." But with each passing minute, as the rain began to fall harder and the wind howled louder, Karen felt the weight of the situation growing heavier. She had promised Duke she would get him out, but as the darkness of night began to settle in, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep that promise. The fear in her chest grew, as did the realization that time was running out. The clock was ticking. Would they make it in time? Would she be able to pull Duke from the well before it was too late? The struggle to save him was far from over. The rain fell steadily, the cold droplets stinging Karen's face as she crouched at the edge of the well, staring down into the inky blackness below. Duke's soft whimpers had quieted, leaving only the sound of the wind and the constant drip of water from the stone walls of the well. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of the situation. It had been hours since she first found him, hours since the reality of how deep and desperate his condition had become started to settle in. And now, as the evening wore on and the light began to fade, her hope was slipping, just like Duke's strength. Max's breathing was shallow, each inhalation more labored than the last. His body trembled violently from the cold, and despite his desperate attempts to climb, his paws were slipping, too weak to find a grip on the smooth, wet walls. The weight of exhaustion was pulling him further down, both physically and emotionally. Duke, once so full of energy and spirit, now lay huddled in the well, barely able to move, unable to summon the strength to keep fighting the cold. His once proud posture had given way to a defeated slump. His head rested against the damp stone, eyes half closed, his body trembling not just from the cold but from the crushing weight of his exhaustion. Karen's heart ached as she watched him. She couldn't bear seeing him like this, so weak, so close to giving up. He had always been such a strong, vibrant dog, full of life and love. But now, all that remained was a dog who was clinging to life by a thread. Every breath he took seemed to come slower, weaker, until his once lively amber eyes barely opened to meet hers. "Duke, you're not alone. Please, stay with me," Karen whispered, her voice cracking as she leaned over the edge, staring down into the well, willing him to hear her. The fear in her chest grew stronger as she saw how much his strength had drained away. His eyes fluttered, struggling to stay open, but she could see the exhaustion in every movement. Duke's body was broken, but his spirit, his will to survive, was still there, somewhere deep inside. Karen just had to find a way to reach him before it was too late. Karen stepped back from the well, her hands shaking as she wiped the tears from her face. She had never felt so powerless in her life. Her mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. She had done everything she could think of, reached out to the local authorities, called for help, tried to comfort Duke, but nothing seemed to work. Every rescue method she and the authorities had attempted had failed. The well was too deep. The walls were too smooth. She had no equipment to help. And time was running out. The local authorities had arrived, but even with their help, the situation was becoming more dire with every passing minute. They had tried using ropes, pulleys, and ladders to create a safe way to pull Duke from the well. The first attempts had been slow, awkward, and unsure. Each time they lowered the rope, Duke would hesitate, his paws unable to grasp the lifeline they had offered. His body was too weak, his movements too sluggish. He would slip, his body sliding down further, making Karen's heart sink in her chest. She could see the way he strained, the way his legs trembled as he fought to remain conscious, to stay awake. It was as if he was giving it one last, desperate attempt to survive. Her mind spun in circles, trying to come up with another solution. The well was too deep, and the walls were too slick for Duke to climb. No one had the right equipment. But that didn't matter. She couldn't stop. Not when he was so close to slipping away. She couldn't let him down after everything he had been through. After everything she had promised him. The rescuers continued to pull and tug at the ropes, trying to find the right angle, the right way to lift him. But it was too much. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and Duke's condition worsened. His breathing slowed even further, his body becoming still, the faintest rise and fall of his chest a desperate plea for help. And Karen could see it, he was slipping. The breaking point came when Duke's body seemed to collapse completely. His eyes fluttered shut, his breathing shallow and erratic, and for a moment, Karen feared the worst. Duke wasn't moving anymore. She could barely hear his faint breaths as they became slower, more labored. His head hung lower, and his body slumped even further into the dark abyss of the well. The emotional weight of the moment hit Karen like a freight train. She was running out of time. "Duke," she cried, her voice choked with emotion. Her hands reached for him, though she knew it was futile. The darkness swallowed him whole, and she felt a sinking feeling in her chest that made her want to crumble. She had tried so hard. She had given everything she had. But was it enough? As her hands rested on the rope, her fingers numb from the cold, she knew that she couldn't give up. Not now. Not when he needed her most. She couldn't let him die alone in that well. She would not let that happen. Karen's mind cleared, and she found the resolve deep within herself. She had to push herself further than ever before. She had to give everything she had left. Her body ached from the cold, her hands were raw from gripping the rope, and her heart was heavy with fear. But none of that mattered now. Duke was depending on her. Without thinking, she grabbed a shovel from the edge of the well, her hands trembling as she dug into the earth around the well's base. There had to be a way to get closer to him. She didn't know how much time she had, but she couldn't just stand there and watch him suffer. She had to act. Her hands were raw, her mind numb with fear, but Karen refused to stop. She kept digging, her body trembling with exhaustion, but every time she looked at Duke, lying at the bottom of the well, barely breathing, she knew there was no turning back. She had to reach him. She had to get him out. "Duke, I'm coming," she whispered through gritted teeth, as she scraped the dirt away. The sound of her shovel hitting the earth was drowned out by the pounding of her own heartbeat. "Just hold on. Please, just hold on." Her muscles screamed in protest, and her vision blurred with fatigue, but she refused to stop. She could hear Duke's faint, desperate whimpers below, and it gave her the strength to keep going. She didn't care if she was breaking herself physically, she wasn't going to lose him. Every breath she took, every movement of her hands, was a silent promise to the dog at the bottom of the well. A promise that she would not stop until he was safe. The rain continued to pour down as she made a small ledge, just enough to get lower into the well. Duke's body was trembling, his legs no longer able to support him. But Karen didn't stop. She lowered herself into the well, her arms shaking from the strain. She reached out, her fingers grazing Duke's cold fur. He barely responded, but in that moment, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. She wasn't too late. With everything she had left, Karen pulled Duke into her arms, cradling him as best she could. His body was weak, and his breath was shallow, but as she wrapped her arms around him, she felt the warmth of life returning to his small body. He wasn't lost. Not yet. and neither was she. "Come on, Duke. We're getting you out of here," Karen whispered, her voice thick with emotion, as she began the slow, painful climb back to safety. The minutes stretched into hours, and Karen's body was growing heavier with fatigue. Every part of her ached from the relentless digging, the cold rain soaking through her clothes. Her mind was a whirlwind, her focus narrowing only to the task at hand, getting Duke out of the well. The reality of his weakness was crushing, and the thought of failing him was too much to bear. But with each moment that passed, she had to believe there was still hope. She couldn't give up now, not after everything she had already done to get this far. After what felt like an eternity, Karen finally managed to get a secure grip on the rope. She had fashioned it in such a way that it could safely encircle Duke's fragile body. Her hands shook as she threaded the rope around him, making sure it was tight enough to lift but not so tight that it would cause him harm. Duke's body was limp beneath her, and the moment his weight rested against the rope, he barely stirred. She could feel the lifelessness in his frame, the exhaustion that had worn him down to the bone. But she knew this was their chance. This was the moment she had been working for. As the rope looped around his chest, Duke's body twitched slightly. His eyes, once barely open, fluttered, and for a fleeting moment, Karen thought he might not even register the lifeline that was being offered to him. But then, something changed. With the faintest stir of his head, he lifted his gaze and met Karen's eyes. There was a flicker of recognition in his amber eyes, as if he understood that the rope was his chance to escape the dark, damp hell he had been trapped in for so long. Max's head lifted slightly, his muscles straining with the last remnants of his strength. Karen could feel the weight of his body against the rope, and her heart pounded in her chest. The rope was his final lifeline, his only chance. She whispered to him softly, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "I've got you, Duke. You're not alone anymore." Duke's eyes closed again for a moment, but Karen could feel him trying to muster enough energy to fight one last time. She held her breath, her hands gripping the rope tightly, as she started to pull with everything she had left. The rain pelted her skin, and the wind howled around her, but nothing else mattered now. Duke's life was hanging by a thread, and she had to make it count. The tension was unbearable. Every inch of Duke's frail body was being pulled upward, and for a moment, Karen felt the rope stretch under the strain. Her heart skipped a beat as the rope tightened, the pressure increasing with each pull. For a second, she thought the line would snap. She could feel Duke's body tugging against the rope, the strain of his weak limbs barely able to hold on. The moment seemed to freeze in time. Duke's body hung in the air, suspended between the cold, damp well and the safety of the ground. Karen's muscles screamed in protest, her body on the verge of collapse from exhaustion, but she didn't let go. She pulled harder, her breath coming in short gasps as she fought against the forces working against them. The tension was palpable, the silence between each pull broken only by the sound of the rope straining under the weight. Then, with one final desperate gasp, Duke's body began to rise. Slowly at first, inch by inch, but then more steadily as the rope held strong. Karen's heart raced as she watched him, her hands gripping the rope tighter, praying it would hold. The world seemed to fall away as Duke's body emerged from the dark well, his paws now visible, his once sagging form becoming more and more defined. With a final heave, Karen pulled him to safety. Duke was out. As soon as his body hit the soft earth, Karen collapsed to her knees beside him. Her breath was ragged, and her hands were trembling from the effort, but she didn't care. She was on the ground beside him, her hands stroking his fur, tears streaming down her face as she murmured, "You made it. You're safe now." Duke's body was still weak, his legs unsteady as he lay on the ground. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, but there was a spark of recognition in his eyes, a quiet relief that only Karen could see. His tail, though still weak, twitched slightly in response to her touch. She could feel the warmth of his body under her hands, the unmistakable sign that he was alive, that he was going to be okay. For a moment, everything around them faded away, the storm, the fear, the uncertainty. It was just Karen and Duke, a quiet reunion in the midst of a storm. She gently lifted his head, cradling him in her arms as she whispered soft words of comfort. "I promised you I wouldn't leave you, and I didn't. I'm so sorry it took this long." Duke's eyes fluttered again, and though his body was exhausted, his spirit seemed to recognize her. He licked her hand weakly, a small but unmistakable sign of gratitude. He was still alive. He had made it. And Karen, for the first time in hours, allowed herself to let out a shaky breath of relief. The terror, the desperation, the unknown, all of it had come to an end. Duke was safe. Karen sat with him, holding him close as she let the tears fall freely. She could feel the rain soaking through her clothes, but it didn't matter anymore. The cold was a distant memory, the exhaustion in her bones almost non-existent as she felt Duke's warmth against her chest. She couldn't stop the tears, not now, not after everything they had both been through. She had saved him. And now, as she cradled him in her arms, Karen knew that everything she had done had been worth it. Duke's body still trembled, but it was different now. It wasn't from fear or pain, it was the last remnants of the ordeal he had endured, the physical toll of being trapped in that well for so long. But as she held him, Karen could feel the faintest flicker of strength returning. Duke wasn't just alive, he was going to recover. He was going to be okay. With trembling hands, Karen gently lifted him into her arms, her heart swelling with love and relief. "You're going to be okay, Duke. You're safe now. I won't leave you again." As she walked back to her house, the world around them was quiet. The storm had passed, the rain now a soft drizzle. The air felt cleaner, the weight of the ordeal lifting with every step she took. Duke's breathing, though still labored, was steadier now, and Karen knew that the worst was behind them. They had made it through together. She didn't look back at the well, or the rain, or the stormy sky. All that mattered was that Duke was safe. The bond between them, forged in those long hours of struggle, would never break. She had kept her promise to him, he wasn't alone anymore. The final moment of the rescue, when she had felt the relief of pulling Duke to safety, was forever etched in her heart. And as she carried him to the warmth of her home, she knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for them both. Days passed, and with each one, Duke's body regained some strength. At first, he was still weak, his limbs trembling from the exertion of being trapped for so long, but slowly, with the help of the warm blankets Karen had wrapped around him and the food she gently coaxed him to eat, he began to heal. His once gaunt frame filled out as his strength returned, his ribs less visible beneath his thick fur. His coat, once matted and covered in dirt, now gleamed in the soft light of the living room where he spent most of his time resting. Each day, Duke grew more confident. He wobbled on shaky legs at first, but with time, his movements became steadier. His tail, which had been limp and motionless in the well, now wagged with excitement whenever Karen came into the room. She could feel the life returning to him, the warmth in his eyes slowly replacing the dullness of the trauma he had endured. By the end of the week, Duke was walking more comfortably, his movements more fluid as he moved around the house, exploring his new surroundings with the same curiosity he once had before the well. The most significant change, however, was the joy in his eyes. Duke's spirit, which had been dimmed by the terror of being trapped in the dark well, was rekindled with each gentle touch and word of encouragement Karen offered. He trusted her more each day, following her around the house, his steps no longer hesitant but filled with newfound energy. When he lay beside her at night, Karen could feel the gratitude in his presence. He had made it through, and in the process, so had she. Karen's heart swelled with pride and relief as she watched Duke recover. She had never known a bond like the one they now shared. She had been the one to save him, yes, but it was clear that in many ways, it was Duke who had saved her. The ordeal had changed both of them. She had been lost in the desperation of the situation, unsure of whether they could make it. But in saving him, she had found a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about the rescue anymore, it was about the connection they had forged, the unspoken understanding between them that was more than just survival. They had become family. As Karen looked at Duke, her heart full of gratitude, she reflected on the journey they had both been through. She had been the one to find him, the one who refused to give up, but now, she could see the changes in him, the quiet strength that had emerged from the dog who had once been so broken. They had both been through so much, and in the darkest of moments, they had found hope together. What had begun as an emergency rescue had turned into something far more meaningful, a deep, unshakable bond forged through hardship. Duke was no longer the dog trapped in the well, desperate and cold. He was a survivor, his journey from desperation to safety a testament to the power of hope, the resilience of the spirit, and the loyalty of an animal whose trust had never truly wavered. They had faced the worst of times and come out on the other side, stronger for it. The story of Duke wasn't just about survival. It was about the strength that lies in the hearts of those who refuse to give up, even when the odds are stacked against them. It was about the connection between humans and animals, a bond that transcends words. Karen's unwavering determination and Duke's quiet resilience had led them to this place, together. Max's journey was not just a testament to his will to live, but also to the unbreakable power of loyalty, love, and hope. He had defied the odds, survived the unimaginable, and found a home where he was cherished. Through this journey, both Karen and Duke had learned the most profound lessons. No matter how dark the days get, there is always a flicker of hope. And as long as there is that hope, there is the chance to heal, to recover, and to find strength in each other. Together, they had defied the odds, and in the process, they had found each other. And that, in itself, was the greatest rescue of all.